No, see? Totally a doctor.
Hey,
Piece of
Dr.
paper
JR.
says so in your face,
His paper
Michael.
says
not a
his
doctor.
paper,
In your face.
his
Doctor
paper says
of-
it, Mike.
Yeah.
You're
his
not a
Doctor of
paper said
Divinity.
it.
Look, it's got
You're
a
not
it's got
a
an
doctor.
official seal.
You're
It's
not
got an
a
official
doctor.
seal and
You're
everything.
not a doctor.
Oh yes, I
Never
am.
have been a doctor. You're
I
not.
earned this. I earned
you
this by
didn't.
working for the $20 that I had to buy. I
You
had to
spent
pay.
$20. It's from like some weird life church, isn't it?
Yes, the Universal Life Church. God's bless the Universal Life Church, Michael.
I quit the show.
His paper says it, Mike. His paper
Yeah.
says it, Michael.
God.
I can't.
You're not a doc. Okay. Hello,
All
everybody.
rights and privileges and marks
Oh
of
my God.
distinction thereto pertaining here or elsewhere. Says so.
Yeah, well, not here. Elsewhere is not right here. No.
Elsewhere is in Tamriel.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael OJ, regretfully.
I'm Dr. J.R. Whitcomb.
I am the special guest for the episode, Alex Silverman, because I am apparently one of like 6 people in the entire world that actually likes 4th Ed.
So yeah, the story here is we found so Alex is a good friend of mine in the SCA, and we're in the same household, and he called me after the episode and went, "Oh, I actually like 4th edition," and I went, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, no, I really like 4th edition. I would love to talk to you about 4th edition." And I went, "You know what, buddy? Rock and roll, dude.
Okay.
Rock and roll." And so you can tell us why 4th edition is good.
Okay. So full disclosure here. I don't actually think 4th edition is all that great. However, I think that it did a lot of really good things for Dungeons and Dragons. Little background about me as far as like pertaining to gaming.
Credentials, yeah.
Yep, I first started playing when I was like 7 or 8 back in grade school with like a group of friends. We got like the it was like 3 or 3.5 rule books, and we sat down. We like kind of ran a dungeon crawl actually after like hearing your guys' like histories and stuff. I think it was very much how like people played like.
Was it informative?
What was that?
Was the history informative?
It absolutely was. I've really been enjoying the cast, and thank you so much for having me.
I think the cast of A Totally Different Podcast is awesome. Those 2 guys are amazing. What shit?
Yeah, Dr. JR is great, and of course,
not
Mike,
a
you're an old
doctor.
friend.
He's not a doctor.
He's got the paper, Mike.
Yeah. And he's freaking handsome, too.
He is. But anyway, so at around 7 or 8 years old, me and a group of friends from grade school sat down and we tried to figure out like 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons.
Of course.
And we did like a little dungeon crawl, and I found it infuriating.
And 3.5.
Yeah, I found it infuriating
wow.
because I could not. Keep in mind that like the oldest kid in the group was like 9 years old. And we were all doing this kind of for the first time. One person had played a session with his older brother, like one session. And his older brother was in high school at the time. But so I found it infuriating because I couldn't play the character that I wanted to play. I wanted to play a lightning sorcerer, and there just wasn't enough lightning spells in the core rulebook for me to play a sorcerer based all around lightning. And that frustrated me. So what we actually ended up doing was throwing away the rulebook and basically playing like our own version of the Tri-Stat system, which worked fine as like grade school kids. Come high school, one of my robotics mentors started up a little game store right down the road from my high school, and this was right as 4th edition was coming out. I was a sophomore in high school.
So like 2007?
2007, 2008. I think he opened the store like super early 2008 and like announced it 2007. So like 4th Ed was just starting out. And he said, "Yeah, we're going to do a D&D game." And I'm like, "You know what? I'll give it another shot." And I sat down and I had a third edition Dungeons Master guide that I found used and a 3.5 player's handbook. And I brought them in, and it's like, we're going to try this new version of Dungeons and Dragons that just came out, 4th edition. And I'm like, whoa. And it was really cool because my DM at the time was a guy who had played since version 1 AD&D.
Wow. Wow,
Yeah.
he went through a lot of hell to get there. His
Yeah.
wizards had one spell.
Yeah. Yeah. So great guy. And he sat down and he ran a Forgotten Realms campaign for the 3.5, 4 years that he owned the store, and then we finished out the campaign after the store unfortunately went under with kind of the core people from that gaming group.
And this was all 4th edition.
All 4th edition. We basically played through the entire run of 4th edition.
So, and that's kind of why you're on the show right now, because I was
Yeah.
talking to you and you were like, oh yeah, no, I'll help you with your research. There's this and this and this. And I went, you know what, just come on the show. Just you can just tell me this
Yeah.
stuff. But I want to actually start off with some history of 4th edition and kind of how we got to this travesty. So 4th edition's announced in 2007 at Gen Con. Now, Hasbro has already purchased Wizards of the Coast. They still own Wizards of the Coast to this day. And Hasbro wanted a new line. 3rd edition and 3.5 were generally, I think they're the best-selling D&Ds that was ever made.
To that point, certainly.
Absolutely, at that point, it was the top game out there for a while. I think 5th edition's actually outsold it now.
It has.
It's getting there. I was looking at a graph about a week ago, and there's totally like a reverse bell curve. And yeah, 5th edition is totally like it's almost back up to the 3rd edition peak.
Yeah, and well, 3rd edition went around for a long time. At 2007, their profits were dropping a little bit. Turns out people were no longer buying the weird splat books. This is also the age of the internet. They were losing to games like World of Warcraft. They were losing to games like, well, you could play if you want to play Dungeons and Dragons, cool. Pop on Baldur's Gate. You want to play Dungeons and Dragons? Play Neverwinter Nights. You want to play Dungeons and Dragons? Pop in Planescape Torment, the best game ever made.
I will fight you for my Neverwinter Nights.
Neverwinter is great, but if you want to play it, you can have instant gratification, play in these D&D worlds, and you can experience the adventure. So 2007 at Gen Con, they announce Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, and the response is very mixed. Initially, it was marketed as there would be an online system called D&D Insider. What D&D Insider would do, essentially, you would have like a character database you can play your game in, and it was marketed to have a virtual tabletop. So you would have they showcase 3D models that would walk around, and you could press your button, you could zone in the screen just like you were playing Baldur's Gate, and all your games can now be like Baldur's Gate. Complicated mathematics was a thing of the past. You pressed the roll button, it calculated everything for you. The GM could move monsters around, but they had little animations. They were like bip. They would move. There would be a full character creator in there. One of the big statements that Mike Merles, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, he was one of the lead designers that really wanted to get down was, I wanted to create a character quickly and efficiently. I wanted a 10-minute character creation. I wanted to be snippy. I wanted to be snappy so new players can get into the game. Because these online games have a much lower barrier to entry. You don't need to learn a whole rule book. You just press the game and the tutorial tells you what to do. You don't have to read anything. It like tells you what to do. Whoa. And that
is this what eventually grew into D&D Beyond?
So D&D Beyond
Sort
is, well, actually, we'll get to the story of how D&D Insider goes terribly, terribly wrong. Because it's going to go terribly, terribly wrong. Like, wow, we're going to get to the story of D&D Insider and why we never got the tabletop simulator, because we never do.
Mm-hmm.
But it is what leads to the current D&D Beyond. A lot of people say 4th edition saved D&D because it brought all these new products to the line. It brought all these new systems, but I argue that was not the intention. They were not trying to alienate half their fan base. They were trying to sell a product. And I know, Alex, you want to say something.
So I do have a few things that I want to say, I think. And I am literally the one who told you that this is part of why I think that 4th edition really kind of saved D&D. So a couple things. I also actually did a little bit of research. Weird that the doctor is the one that doesn't do any research for these things.
Hey, you want to see my pages?
I'm not that kind of
notes?
doctor, man.
You're not a doctor. Not a doctor at all, actually.
Hey, for the record, I do lots of research for other videos, but for this one, I figured Mike's doing research. We're bringing in an expert. I'm just going to come in blind and be an absolute jerk about it.
When have you done research? Tell me one time you've done research on the show.
So a couple of things here. Number one, a little bit that I found out with things is that it wasn't so much that 3.5 sales were declining; it's that they had plateaued.
Stagnating.
They'd stagnated. Yeah, exactly. So it was like when you're running a business, you wanted to do this. The Dungeons and Dragons was kind of doing one of these. Like it was like new people weren't really coming in. Most of the revenue was coming from the new splats and settings that were coming out with old players. So you talked about the controversies at 4th edition's announcement. Interesting thing I found in my research, the first run of 4th edition, the core rule books, because they released the Player's Handbook 1, because there were multiple Player's Handbooks, Dungeons Master's Guide 1, and Monster Manual 1.
And I
all
believe
together.
those were actually in the titles, right? Like it was very clear, like there are going to be more players.
Yes, this is absolutely a thing.
Yeah. Which is very overwhelming to someone coming up and going, what do you mean 1?
They sold out of the original run while they were still taking pre-orders. They had more pre-orders than they can print books in time for launch. And this is why when I talked to you, Mike, about saying that the 4th edition controversy was our generation's quote-unquote satanic panic, and you're like, no, it's not. That was a huge thing in the media. You have to realize the waves that the 4th edition announcement and demos made through the nerd communities, because they're changing D&D. They're taking away everything I know. And everybody lined up to buy to see what this new controversial thing was about. They literally could not, between the announcement and the publication, they could not print enough books to fill the pre-orders.
Interesting.
Even with Hasbro's resources.
Huh. So even with all that, they couldn't. So, but this was the initial launch.
This was the
not
launch.
Not the what would be.
Yeah, exactly.
Dragons.
So once people figured out it actually stank, sales tanked.
So there was a. This kind of goes into the next thing.
Who mailed me some dog shit? Oh, it's the
D&D.
Oh, it's 4th edition.
D&D 4th edition was I'm a huge car enthusiast, and there's a saying in the car community: committees kill cars. Every brilliant car has been the brainchild of a single visionary or a really small crack team.
Or just Carol Shelby.
Carol Shelby is one of my heroes. So yeah. But yeah, so it's always these little things. When you have a big committee building a car, it's always shit. Pontiac Aztec, which if you've seen Breaking Bad, that's what Walter White drives. It's ugly, it's terrible, it doesn't do shit well, but it met every single criteria that the committee set out for it. 4th edition was, I believe, the first role-playing game that was built by a committee.
It was built by a committee for the first time. You're 100% right on that. It was a committee of different game designers, and most of the time in game design, you're not actually being hired to do you're not a full-time employee. What you are is what's called a contract guy. So you get a little Jeff, I need you to write the magic system. Great. After it's done, thank you. Here's your money. We own the rights to this. Get out.
Oh. Woo, money.
But yay, money, right? It's how you make a living in writing. And it was a committee of people who were all deciding what the next thing for D&D was going to be. And you're absolutely right. It is a whole committee that was deciding on what needs to be next in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yep. And there were
so who decided to get rid of spells and replace them all with those garbage ass abilities?
I actually have the answer to that. So first of all, if you don't know, actually, Alex, go ahead. You're the expert here. Go ahead and explain how the spell system worked. Because in previous editions, we had the Vancian spellcasting system, spell slots, and levels. Go ahead and explain how I would use powers in this game.
So in 4th edition, so a little to take a step back here for a second. During my research, I found one of these I was very well aware of through the entire thing. It's very obvious from the game design, but there were 2 core goals to 4th edition. Number 1, how do we get the MMO crowd essentially to play our game? And number 2 was, how do we bring back the people that were turned off by 3rd edition, that liked their AD&D stuff. And the very simple answer to that was they added the epic tier back in.
And
Core
they added
rulebook.
in a bunch of unnecessary math.
Well, yeah,
But
well,
we'll get
so,
back to that in a
yes,
second.
So yes, we'll get back. But go ahead and just explain,
So-
because I remember when I played Fourth, I had these nice little cards set out in front of me, and I would say,
Mm.
"This is my at-will power."
Yep. So the way they did power, so for the first time, every class got powers. In previous editions, you had your fighter, you had your rogue who could sneak attack, and your fighter who could hit. And if you took feats, you could do things like Great Cleave.
Cleave, yeah.
Yeah. But it was still really like you had like one, maybe two options of what to do on any given turn. Now, every class had at will, encounter, and daily powers. And the way these
It's-
were was
Go on.
the way these worked was an at will power was something you could use anytime. So like attack was an at will power, but you could also have like special attacks where it was like
I could like firebolt too, right? Like if
yeah,
I was like a wizard,
magic
I could
missile was magic
Yeah.
missile was an at will, and now we have cantrips, which I think was really important because it low level wizards and sorcerers and casters in previous editions where it was like, well, I've used up my one spell slot for the day. I'm completely useless except for my darts, guys, because Mike loves to bring up the darts. But now
one
it was
damage.
like, okay,
One damage.
but now it's like, okay, I used up my fireball, so I don't have my big nuke anymore, but I can still rain down magic missiles or firebolts or eldritch blasts. And I can keep doing that. But even like the melee classes, it wasn't just like attack was your at will. Like there was one for, I think it was the Twin Blade Ranger, or it might have been one of the barbarian builds, where it was like, if you had two weapons, you made a regular attack with damage modifier with your main hand, and you made an attack with your offhand weapon that didn't have the damage modifier to it. So
yeah,
it was like,
and it was called the power was called offhand attack. Like I'd have my main attack, and I did use. Oh, it says I can use this power
Yeah.
with another thing, and those are your at wills. Now
Yeah.
the encounters were a little bit stronger, right? That was like my cleave and stuff.
the
like that.
the encounter, the encounter was like would have been like your cleaves, your lightning bolts, stuff where it was like this is a little beefier. And encounter powers recovered every time you took a short rest, which in fourth ed was specified as 5 minutes. In fifth ed, it's a short rest is an hour. But the idea was that like 5 minutes was in fifth edition short rest is an hour.
All right, that's cool.
So with fourth edition,
Oh, and then we talk about daily powers, which are
Yeah.
like your big whammies.
You
This is
need
like your super fireball, your power word kill. But you can use them once every long. You have to take a whole night's rest to use.
Yep,
And
8
everything
hours,
was
8 hours
guarded
rest
by
to
these
get it back.
powers. Now, if
Yeah.
I had like 3 daily powers, the way it worked, we had these cards printed out, and I'd have them right in front of me, and I'd say I'm using this daily power, and I'd turn it over, and I could use a certain number of daily powers a day, and that was kind of how the
Well,
system.
you had as many daily powers as you had access to powers, because you had a certain number of each type that you could have at any one time, and it was like as you leveled up, eventually you'd start swapping them out. And there were some lower level things that it was like, you know what, I'm just gonna keep this. Like there was a relatively low level warlord ability where it was everybody that's in melee range of the target, if I land a hit on it, takes an attack against that target. Like that was like a third level encounter power. That was absolutely worth keeping all the way through level 30.
Now, and I'm glad you mentioned Warlord for a second, because it's another thing that Jeff, you never played Fourth a whole bunch, right? You played it only a little bit?
Nope, I never touched the damn thing.
So one thing that Fourth Edition does is it boiled everything down, even more so than it was now. Now, the game had some of the coolest name classes. There was like the Scion and the Rune Priest and the Artificer and the Vampire,
Warden.
which was
I loved the Warden.
The Warden, yeah, that sounded really badass.
They were a defensive barbarian.
Vampire was a class. It had powers.
Yeah,
but
it was from the Ravenloft module. They gave a vampire class.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, I can kind of understand that 'cause
the anger of what?
So
I can kind of
Ravenloft
understand the thought
module.
process there.
So what they did in the Ravenloft fourth ed, if I'm remembering right, was there was a feat you could take that was like infected with vampirism, and that like gave you racial modifiers. But if you took the vampire class, this was like you have dedicated yourself to refining the inherent gifts of vampirism.
And so one of the things that every class did was in fourth edition, there must have been upwards of like 30 classes. There was four classes.
Yep.
There were only 4 classes, and your party was ideally made for a party of 4 dudes. There were 4 classes with different flavors. So the 4 classes were, there was the leader, whose job was to buff everybody up. There was the striker.
They were the healers.
Yes, there's the striker, whose job it was to deal damage. There was the defender, whose job it was to take hits. And there was the controller, which is a thing we don't really see in D&D anymore, who is all about like playing a tabletop, like playing a board game. I move you 2 squares this way. I move the enemy a square this way. I give you another attack. I give you another attack. I move the battlefield. I make a little mountain, so I make some difficult terrain. You were essentially like controlling the board using your controller.
Yeah, you were manipulating the flow of battle.
Which is cool. Like I could literally like move, like I could say like, I'm an inspiring warlord. Jeff, I inspire you. Go that way.
This is 4th edition. I refuse to feel inspired.
So the one of the things that actually caused some controversy at my table is that wizards were controllers.
They were controllers.
So people who liked my fiance is coming home from work. So wizards were controllers. And that made a lot of people unhappy because the wizards' damage numbers were nothing compared to what they had been previously.
The two strikers were the sorcerer and the warlock. Those were the strikers.
Yeah, and this was the most different we ever saw wizards and sorcerers in a Dungeons and Dragons version, because the sorcerer was all about going, fuck this guy in particular, I'm gonna blow him the fuck up, and the wizard was about sitting back, the puppet master, using storms to blow somebody that way and manipulating this person this way.
Now, this also led to a big issue with 4th edition. And the first major issue we see is every controller. There was a thing called power sources, which in the briefest of sense, everything was powered by something. Like some of them are powered by the arcane, some of them are powered by psionics, some of them are powered by the divine, some are powered by the primal energy, some are powered by shadows. Like a monk was psionic, a cleric was a divine leader.
Yeah. Warlord was the martial leader.
The primal leader, yeah. And the barbarian was the primal striker. Everything had a 2-word combination.
Martial was one of them. Martial was like fighter, warlord, and that was just like, you're just a buff dude.
Oh yeah. You're a dude, and I do things by hitting people.
I love the flavor of warlord that their heal is literally you get the fuck on your feet and get back to the front.
Well, and that was one of the big issues with 4th edition is, while everything seemed really cool, the way you leveled up was you couldn't multi-class. You were
not initially.
One thing.
They added it later.
And when you we'll get to multi-class in a second. So when you multi-class, you had to pick your class as a multi-class class.
Yep.
You could not just
at
be
first
like
level, right?
At first level. Once you
you couldn't decide later, right?
Exactly. You were stuck with what you were as you leveled up. And when you leveled up, remember 10-minute character creation, I chose one of 2 powers, and they always were kind of the same flavor. Now here are powers that exist. There is Inspiring Word. It is a bard power. It heals D8 plus charisma to a target within 30 feet. Then we have Healing Word. It's
the cleric ability.
It's a cleric power. It is D8 plus your wisdom modifier to somebody within 30 feet. And I think there's Commanding Word, which is Warlord. D8 plus your strength modifier, which I think is the coolest thing ever going.
It was Constitution. I believe it was Constitution.
It might be Constitution of I am so buff. Get up! The beach is that way. Move 2 squares that way. That's exactly what I want this guy to be, by the way.
Yeah.
And that was it. There was like Psionic Bolt. It deals D6 plus intelligence. There was Firebolt. It does deal 3 plus charisma.
And that was like one of my primary issues with the whole system is that the customization to it just seemed so freaking fake. Like every class had an answer to every other class's skill. Every single class had the exact same skills, which is different freaking labels.
4 classes. There were 4 classes.
4 classes.
Yeah.
Now we get
and they're the same classes.
Now we get to the other big issue that I believe Fourth Ed has.
I will say the one benefit though, if you had a low-level party of 4 people and you were playing the proper ways, it's actually a really decent miniatures combat game.
It really is.
Mhm.
But you have to have 4 people who are playing the 4 classes.
The other, and they really were made to synergize beautifully. Like the way they filled in each other's gaps was really well done. It's a wonderful miniatures combat game. The other big issue, and I'll also get to something that is cited as a major issue, but is one of those things that I think really can just be fixed with a good DM. Not necessarily through house ruling, just through good dungeon mastering. And the other big issue was the monthly release cycle. Mm-hmm. There was a new core book released every month. And you talked in previous episode, Dr. JR, about
the glut of content.
Well, yeah, but also the trying to be able to afford all these books.
Yeah,
these were $40 books at this point.
Hardcover only.
Yep, hardcover only.
Hardcover. It was a big push they made. Hardcover only.
Ain't nobody got time for that shit.
Yep, and there was a new hardcover book every month, and
there was a lot of them.
Yeah, and so there were by the end of Fourth Ed's run, which by the way, if we count 3 and 3.5 as one Generations of Dungeons and Dragons, Fourth Ed is by far the shortest run any edition had. There were 3 players' handbooks, 3 monster manuals, 3 dungeon masters guides, a whole slew of campaign settings, a bunch of modular stuff.
The Psionics Guide, the Complete Martial Guide 1, the Complete Martial Guide 2, the Complete Martial Guide 3, the Complete Primal Guide 1, the Complete Primal Guide 2, the Complete Primal Guide 3, the Complete Arcane Guide, the Complete Arcane Guide 2, the Complete Arcane Guide 3, the Complete Divine Guide, the Complete Divine Guide 2. And it gave you one extra thing to pick, but you couldn't play these new classes because you had to pick them at first level. You wanted to find a really cool cleric thing that you found called the Zealot, which was the barbarian cleric. Cool. Make a new character.
Yep. So that was a real issue with it really ran headfirst into its bloat. And I think that they learned a lot of lessons going into 5th Ed whereas the core employed team at Wizards of the Coast was something like 30 people for 4th Ed. Like I said, it was a committee. 5th Ed, there are 8 full-time Dungeons and Dragons employees, to my knowledge, at Wizards of the Coast right now. So they pulled it back. There's a core book that comes out once a year now, and then a bunch of supplements and dungeons and pamphlets and stuff.
Now there's also the issue of numbers bloat, which is
a
lot of powers would give me buffs. So I'd maybe come up to you and I'd be like, I am an inspiring bard. I give you I'm an inspiring cleric. I give you bless. And some guy goes, I summon a shadow from the underworld, which is really cool flavor. I give the monster a -3. And a guy goes, well, I evoke a holy spell from the heavens to light up the battlefield, negating your shadows, giving me a +4. And the guy goes, but wait, you see, I was a warlord the whole time, and I give all of you a -1 because you're in my commanding presence. And you're
all
going,
right, Shakespeare, stop monologuing. We have to get this round over. We're just going to crunch the numbers and get it done and over with.
Going, what am I rolling? So people would be like, there's +3 and -3. That's a 0. And there's a +1. And it's a -4. Okay, I'm going to give a description. We don't got time for a description. We ain't got time for that.
So
move on, baby.
To bring this up, I remember people at the table bringing scratch paper so they could jot down the notes of their pluses and minuses. It's also worth noting that, for example, in 5th edition, advantage and disadvantage are you roll twice and take the higher or lower, whether it's advantage or disadvantage. Yeah. In 4th edition, it was a flat, I think it was +2, -2.
It was +2, -2, yeah.
Yeah. So everything was alphanumeric. Everything it wasn't die modifiers, as in go up a die, go down a die. It was to the
number
plus or
modifiers.
Minus.
And there was one other thing I wanted to actually go on about the bloat, because there's one other thing I'm going to touch on. But go on.
The thing that exacerbated this problem, but also led to some really cool stuff. And I told Mike about this, and he got so excited when he found out.
I did.
Is
I
that
did. I got very excited by this next thing.
I mentioned it in passing, but I think it's worth like actually talking about. Unlike all versions of Dungeons and Dragons, previous and since, instead of 1 through 20, the game was 1 through 30, and it was divided into 3 very clear tiers, which was the first tier. Crap, I can't remember the name of it. Do you know?
I think it was adventuring tier.
Yeah, adventure tier, and that was level 1 through 10, and that was you chose your class and your like specialty version.
I'm a hero.
Yeah.
It's me.
Yep. And I actually went and saw a presentation at PAX East at like 2000 when they were in 2008 when they presented the thing that Mike touched on earlier with the 3D tabletop simulator and everything.
Which we'll get to in a second.
We'll get to that in a bit.
Talk about that.
But one of the things they talked about during that presentation was how they envisioned the scaling of Dungeons and Dragons, where this level 1 through 10, well, even at level 1, you're already like that's Daredevil in season 1 of Daredevil. You're already a freaking hero. And like level 10, you're like, that's like the Defenders team up movie. Like you're taking down like city level threats.
It was the epic tier.
Yeah, well, this was levels 1 through 10.
11, 1 through 10, yes.
And that was like, Luke Cage would have been like a level 8 if you go by his show stuff at best. Mm-hmm. You go to, once you hit 11th, you went to Paragon tier, and this replaced prestige classes, and a lot of the prestige classes were rolled into what they called Paragon paths.
Wasn't Paragon 20 through 30?
No, that was epic.
Oh, okay. I'm incorrect.
So Paragon, so when you reached 11th level in 4th ed, every character chose a Paragon path. And this could be a further refinement of the class specialization you had. Excuse me. This could be a further refinement. It could be something that kind of deviated a little bit, gave you access to new stuff. And they gave you access to new features, new powers, opened up new feats for you.
This was the only way to get a new class. The only way was this. And this is what people actually liked about it.
Yep, and it was, but there were also Paragon paths based on your race, or like you could.
Yeah, I could be like the best dwarf, or the best elf. If I want to be like, what do my elf eyes see? Well, my Paragon path is all about what do my elf eyes see. There was one that was really cool where it was the Dragonborn specific Paragon path. Fourth edition was also the first edition that we see Dragonborn as a player's handbook race and tieflings. Yes.
I was about to say no, because there was the Dragonborn in was it Tome and Blood?
Not in player's handbook, though.
Not in the player's handbook.
Yeah,
as a core race. In fact, they're on the cover of the book, the Dragonborn. Yep. They wanted to make a bunch of crazy races, but do talk about the third tier, because I want to bring up something about. I want to go back to Paragon Paths in a second, but talk about the third tier.
Okay, so when you hit level 21, you hit the epic tier, and this was their idea to try to draw people back who had kind of dropped after AD&D. Because in AD&D, they laid down kind of this framework for epic campaigns that never really showed up in 3.3.5, at least in the official books. There were some of like the open game and license stuff that went into it, but there wasn't anything official about it. And the epic destinies, this shit was crazy. Like I hit 21, and there was one epic destiny where it's like, by the time you hit level 30, you're the new Bahamut.
Yeah, you just become Bahamut.
Yeah.
Like, I think Vecna's level, 29.
32, I think. 32,
oh, he's 32? Yeah, you can, a level 30 character, be like, oh, what's up, Vecna? Got him.
Yeah, it was like, so unlike, there was no challenge rating in 4th ed. Instead, the monsters all had levels.
Individually.
Like players' characters did. Yep. Exactly. So it was.
But before we get to monsters, I want to talk about the crunch and the history behind the crunch and why they were trying to beat it. So the crunch was really bad now, and people are used to high numbers. Like you play WoW and you see your DPS scale go up and down, and my powers do all something. Actually, the way you laid out your cards is very similar to a World of Warcraft hotbar. I would have all my powers here. This would go on cooldown. This will pop back off. Cooldown.
I never cut them out. I just had the sheets.
Oh, I always cut them out. I had them in front of me. But here was the thing. They had this online system, and the way the online system worked is it would keep track of everything for you. Remember, they had a virtual tabletop game. In this system called D&D Insider, it would be a monthly subscription. Monthly. So you would pay, I think it was $5 to $10 a month.
Yep.
And you would get access to a character creator, the dice roller, the systems tracker. So even if you didn't want to roll the dice, which defeats the purpose of a role-playing game, but if you wanted to play online, you press a little button. 3D models would walk around. The dungeon master could build landscapes, and they had all this stuff promised in 2007.
They hit the I want to make it clear they hit the convention circuit hard with this, and
yes,
like
they did.
Really were like, this is the future of Dungeons and Dragons.
And when we say hit it hard, I mean $50 million hard. The total cost for this system was $50 million, and it was going to be a much higher subscription fee. Originally, it came out to be $10. Originally, it was going to be like $20 a month. Rival, I think it was $15 a month. Rival WoW, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get a whole online tabletop system, and they give you access to every book that's ever come out. So you don't have to buy the hardcover books anymore.
So
you can just say, I want to use this. Well, hold on. I want to get to the history real quick because we're not there yet. The reason why the tabletop failed is, to me, the most shocking part of 4th edition. The leader of the guy was a guy named Joseph Batten. Now, Joseph Batten was the head designer of the system. He worked on like Halo, Gears of War. He did a whole bunch of stuff. He was very overworked by Wizard. I think the guy was like a Harvard graduate. In the year 2008, so he's about to release his product, D&D goes live. 2 weeks after it goes live, they have a system to release the beta immediately. It will take another year for D&D Insider to give you the perfect tabletop system. And then his wife cheated on him. So he murdered her, shot her multiple times, and then killed himself. And went on a weird rampage against in the area, caused disturbance. No one else died, but it was a whole murder-suicide situation. And so they scrapped the online tabletop.
No, I vaguely remember hearing about that now.
So I had the D&D Insider when I was playing 4th Ed on the regular.
And one second, going back to this, the murder. So D&D team is looking at D&D's team is saying, "Oh my goodness, you know what? We're gonna cut our losses. There's too much bad blood here. Let's just release an online system." So all you got was a character creator. And that's all you got, really. And you got access to the books to make your character. However, they couldn't justify the price point anymore. So what was a $15 price point became a $5 a month price point. Now, what this also jumped to is, because this happened, believe it or not, this is one of the reasons why Washington State has a higher gun control. It was one of the cited cases that stopped gun control from happening. But murder-suicide, lead designer, D&D 4th edition. And it left also a taste of people's mouth going, wait, the D&D people are the ones who murdered someone? Oh my goodness.
I'm honestly trying to recall, because I do remember hearing about this now. But yeah, I think it's because it was one of those things that was swept under the rug so goddamn hard, it didn't stick. Huh. Freaky.
Yeah.
I was reading about this today, and I went, "What happened?"
That was the.
What?
This is the thing that Mike and I were talking about off the air earlier, where he did the crazy, where he's like, that's my imitation of Mike with his mic muted.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
I mean, honestly, like I said, this is just, I have vague recollection of this, but this is going back like what, 14 years now?
Yeah, it was a while back.
I mean, you know, you guys were still in like diapers and stuff, right?
I'm almost 30.
Okay.
I'm at least an adolescent. I'm at least like a toddler in your eyes.
I was 11.
So,
I
was at one of the one of the events when were hitting the convention scene about this whole thing, and they literally had this virtual, like, digital tabletop set up, where it was like they were gonna sell these things at a huge discount to game stores, where it was gonna be like $4,000 to game stores and like $15,000 to just random schmoes. where it was going to be like a six-person table that had like a TV in the middle that was ready to go, and there were, like the amiibos for the Switch and everything.
Mhm.
They were going to sell a line of miniatures with those, so you could find your race class combination,
and you could
stick it on and move it around, and you'd see the digital, and you'd roll dice in these little cubbies. Like, this was crazy shit. You'd roll dice in these little cubbies, and it would add all the modifiers for you, physically rolling dice. It was so cool. And then I distinctly remember that everybody going, holy shit. And then they announced the price for general consumers, and everyone was just kind of like, yeah, never mind.
No. Yeah.
Well, again, it was such a weird and that's just system to take away, because everyone promised it and then it was gone. This online tabletop was gone, and now all this bloat they made for the appeal, like the PC audience, to make the game more accessible, became even less accessible. Partially because, do you know what the most popular race and class combination in D&D is? Period. Throughout all editions ever?
Human fighter?
Human fighter. The #1 played race and class in D&D by a wide margin.
I actually, fun little anecdote here with 4th edition. I went through like 6 characters super quick in our campaign. They all just died horribly. And I ran out of creative ideas, and finally I threw up my hands and went, I'm playing a fucking human fighter. I can't think of anything else.
Human fighter?
And I ended up playing that character until the end of the campaign and had a fucking blast doing it.
And you know what #2 is, by the way?
Dwarven cleric?
Human wizard. Number 3, human rogue. #4, human paladin.
That was a fun character. I was like a pirate. I was like a guy who was like a privateer, and like, it was a fun character.
Oh no, actually no, I'm wrong. #2 is elf wizard.
Okay. Fucking elves.
But yeah,
Fucking
turns
elves.
out human fighter is by the highest margin ever. Now here's the big why human fighter is appealing. You're brand new to D&D. What do you tell the new guy to play? It's halfling rogue or it's human fighter. And you go, here's your human fighter.
Yeah.
Here's your guy. He doesn't worry about
who suggests halfling rogue? I have never heard someone suggest that for
really. In 3rd edition it was one of the recommended 4.
I would say like that's way too many skills for a noob, but okay.
So halfling rogue is one of those things where people don't play a human. Halfling rogue tends to be a thing that people like to play because they know the Hobbit. And it happens to be really simple. You just have a good dexterity and you're good at backstabbing people. And people understand what a backstab is, but rogues didn't have any cool special powers. They had backstab. But human fighter is the main one. You're brand new to D&D, I'm going to give you a human fighter.
I'm actually getting ready to start running a new monthly campaign with most of the party has never played before.
Human fighter.
And that's what I mean. I literally brought it up, and you know what they're playing? It just classes. We've got a warlock, a bard, and a paladin.
5th edition made everything easy. 5th edition made everything a little bit easier.
We actually have two warlocks, very different builds, a 4-person party.
But the thing about 4th edition is a human fighter is no longer simple. In fact, no class is simple because every class now has to deal with spells. What made wizards difficult, because you would have like I was playing as a kid, you'd have the one guy be like, hey, I want to play a spellcaster. Yeah, I'm going to finally play a spellcaster. And he had to learn spellcasting. And you were like, wow, that guy has to do a lot of stuff. But in 4th edition, I had to manage my at-will powers, my daily powers, my encounter powers. So it didn't matter what I was playing. People were still getting overwhelmed immensely by the system. And because of the lack of role-playing, because the system did not encourage role-playing, it encouraged Diablo-style dungeon crawls. I'm going through a dungeon, and my best bet is to kick down the door and kill that guy. Now, if that's your play style, 4th is for you, man. But if it's not, they've kind of gutted skills.
So I want to get to that here, and this is what I mentioned earlier when I said that this is something that a lot of people complain about with 4th ed is the gutting of social skills, and I think that that's something that can really be solved with a good DM.
Well, but we're talking about game rules as written.
Yes, but this is what I mean is that coming up as a role player, like as a hardcore role player with that sounded a little bit wrong. Like getting like hardcore into Dungeons and Dragons with 4th ed, cemented a philosophy in me. And that philosophy is one that I really kind of try to preach a lot of, in a way. And that's the goal of the system is to fill in the things that you and your friends can't do in the kitchen.
But at the same point, we want to be fair. We want to talk about the system because I'm a brand new group of role players.
Yeah.
I'm going to play the rules as written.
Oh yeah.
And that's what we're talking about, right? I need to pick up the book and I need to go, here's my book. Here's what I have to do. Here are the rules. Yeah.
And it's funny though, because I found 4th edition so much more intuitive than when I tried 3.5.
Well, as you say that, let me just read this. And Jeff, I want your fill in on this. I'm going to read you a 6th level ranger power that exists in 4th edition. This is not the only power like this. It's called the Oath of the Relentless Hunter. It was in the base. It was in the base book. The base book, level 6 ranger. Here's what you could do. Summarizing it, I pop Oath of the Relentless Hunter. Where's the bad guy hiding out? Tell me where in the world the bad guy is. I get to know its geographical location. I know how to get there. I also know if there are any traps. 6th level power, you just say, hey, I'd like to solve the campaign, please. Thank you very much.
I can only make this face so hard. Like, what in the actual...
Every class had a version of this, too.
Who approved this? What
Scry.
monkey with a fucking keyboard fucking approved this?
This is not the only example of this. You had a bunch of powers where it was just, hey, what if we gave the players this? There were powers of like, I look at the monster, tell me its weakness. I look at the monster, I read its thoughts, and I get to pick what thought I know. Why is this ghost haunting? You're looking for your wife's bones? Here you go.
So from a perspective, because I again, going back to that PAX East that I was at, questions about these powers were asked. And the answer that was given by the panel was that the intention was that these were compass powers, that these were a thing that a player could pop if they didn't know what to do next, and gave the DM the tool to say, yeah, you guys need to go to Thay to find this guy. And that was the intention.
The GM couldn't just be better at their job.
So apparently, a complaint that came in during the 3.5 days was that, because you guys talked about the hotline in previous episode.
Yeah.
Apparently a complaint was, and they got kind of overwhelmed by this, was people saying, how do I get my players to follow my plot?
You give them an interesting plot. And if they don't follow the plot, sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, wait, but can you blame them though? Remember, these are mostly people who were like RPG guys who are used to a standard storyline, who the system doesn't really allow for a role play scenario to happen. So how do I get my players to follow the plot? In Diablo, it's very easy. It's that way. Deckard Cain says go that way. Therefore, I go that way. I kill Diablo.
Or I guess it would be Oblivion back then. But Oblivion gives you the compass that you can follow.
I go that way.
Yeah.
Boom. I hit him.
Going to that panel, there was some really interesting stuff. Another thing was there was a system in 4th Ed called the Bloodied system. And Bloodied... What?
It was the 3rd as well.
Okay. I didn't remember that. But Bloodied was when you were 50% hit points. And I think a lot of people imagined like Bloodied as meaning like like bleeding out of your nose and ears, like you're fucking trash. And in 4th Ed, Bloodied was a big mechanical thing because there were powers that could not be used until you were bloodied, or would not affect you unless you were bloodied.
But it also led to a big issue.
Yeah.
And the big issue with bloodied was the GM had to tell you when the monster is bloodied. So if you were trying to change its hit points, the players would be like, well, sir, he has taken 80 hit points and he was blooded at 80. That means he has maximum 80 hit points remaining. He has taken 112 hit points. Explain this math to me, sir.
So the
happened all the time.
So like, for example, Quivering Palm. Quivering Palm, if you used it on an enemy who was not bloodied, would do would do like, I think it was like 3d12 damage. It was a big damage number. But if you used Quivering Palm against a bloodied enemy, they just died.
That's actually cool.
It is. But
you're gonna die. I'm gonna kill Bill 1-inch punch you. You die.
But they explained that bloody did not mean like limbs getting ready to fall off, like covered in blood and gore. Bloodied was the point where you actually showed visible damage. Because as the game designers of 4th Ed did not view hit points as the number of literal hits you could take. Part of that was physical stamina. Part of that was ability to react to a situation, focus. So Mike and I do SCA heavy list. Taking damage is not just taking hits, it's also that long drawn out fight that completely wins you. You've taken damage.
Now,
that was part of the hit points.
And I think that's actually a cool part.
Yeah, and
cool part of the game.
Yep. Oh wow! I just knocked down half of that monster's hit points. I just must have put a giant fucking gash through it. No, you actually just got it to the point where you can actually start hurting it, not just wearing it out. JR, you're muted. Doctor, you're muted.
I'm aware.
Okay, fair enough. No, and so it's I want to talk about Paragon Paths in just a second, because there were some actually really cool classes you can play as. Like flavor wise, I had some really cool options I could pick, right? Besides just being like Baphomet, which I think is just cool. No, Bahamut. I can just be Bahamut.
Yep.
Which just sounds awesome. I think you got like literal dragon.
Interesting tidbit about the Bahamut Epic Destiny. You had to die to become Bahamut.
So this thing about Epic Destinies, and when Alex explained it to me the first time, I was very, very intrigued by it. It was, let's give you an epic level campaign to be epic. And on paper, these powers sound amazing. Like, I read Bahamut stats and I went, that sounds really cool. And then I went, oh my goodness, I have DR different numbers. There was like DR8, DR13, DR15, and you're just like, every time I get hit, I have to figure out what I was hit by and do math. And if it's multiple damage, I have to do math again. Oh my god. So you get hit and you'd go, I get hit. Okay, cool. What kind of damage? All right, cool. I DR that, I DR that. I use this power to resist it.
Resistance and vulnerabilities were not percentage based. They were based on numbers. Like I could have fire resistance 5. And that meant that I took 5 less fire damage from any given attack. So if there was 4 fire damage, nope, that doesn't affect me. But if there was 6 fire damage, ow, I took a damage. If there was 110, I took 105.
Now,
and being all powerful is boring and stupid.
Well,
this is just math disguised as Skyrim. This
is just math class. I do want to touch on this though. In 2009, another company comes along. I'm not gracing that with an answer. Another company comes along called Piazzo Publishing, and they had existed
before. They were, I believe, Dark Sun's publisher originally. Was it Dark Sun?
Mm-hmm.
They released and they were Dark Sun's publisher. These guys come along and they invent a game called Pathfinder, and Pathfinder was to get the 3.5 crowd back in. Now both 4th edition and Pathfinder had an open gaming license. However, because 4th edition was so limited and the way they required their modules built were weird, so when I published a module for 4th edition, I had to do my skill checks in this particular way. It was not. Let's pretend you are in a you're at a carnival trying to investigate zombies. In most editions, you say, what do you do? And it's like, here's a whole bunch of options. In 4th edition, the way you had to structure your modules according to the open gaming license was give the players these 3 options. They can roll streetwise to check the clowns. They can roll acrobatics to like search the trapeze, or they can roll dungeoneering to scour the lower parts of the thing. This is the only thing you have to say. And say, tell your players they can do these 3 things with the 3 different skills. That was the way they handled skill checks in the open gaming license in 4th edition.
So freaking linear, man. It's making my eyeballs pop out of my skull. Like
very choose your own adventure-y. Turn to page 15. Now, Pathfinder comes along and they say, hey guys, we are going to release this open gaming license because we had this love of the game. And people started writing for Piazzo Publishing rather than Dungeons and Dragons, which led to even more of a decline in D&D Insider, which they put $50 million into. They didn't make that money back. And a decline there. And now this new company, Pathfinder, this new game Pathfinder is taking all of the creative people saying, I want to write for that because I don't feel restricted and I can actually do something. If I want to make a new class, no one's playing new classes in 4th. If I have an ongoing campaign, why would I pick up a new class? Versus in Pathfinder, or 3rd edition for that matter, oh, a new class came out. I'll splash that. I'll multi-class right now into that class. But you couldn't write for ongoing games because no one cared about your content. So Piazzo becomes this tyrant in the field. Not tyrant. Tyrant implies a bad concept, but it's like master of the field. To the point where D&D 4th edition has to release a thing called D&D Essentials, which is basically 4.5, which made everything much, much, much simpler. It was a band-aid for what would become Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition.
Yeah, it introduced a lot of the concepts where they took a bunch of things, they simplified a lot of stuff, and these were, and the interesting thing about the Essentials is for the first time we saw 5th edition books that were paperback and only cost $15. And they were
paperback.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So the thing with D&D Essentials is they took a look at some of the classes and some of the things that like people weren't liking about 4th Ed. And they said, okay, well, we still want to make sure that the fighters can feel special, because that was the point of giving fighters powers. Because it's like because people were like, I don't want to play a fighter because it's the exact same thing the entire game. There's not a lot to growth, at least from the core rule book in the 3 variants. And I felt that hardcore when I looked through the 3.5 rule book for the first time. I'm like, why would anybody ever play a non-caster? That was one of my first thoughts. So with the Essentials variant of the fighter, instead of getting your at-will encounter daily powers like you did in the Player's Handbook fighter, you got stances, where the stances, you could switch between them. And you started with, I think it was 2, and you could gain 1 like every 3 levels. And they give you different passive buffs, where it was like, one of them was like a flat +2 to your AC. Another one was like, if an enemy within your reach made an attack against someone else, you got an automatic opportunity attack. And I will
this
note,
will become the fighting subclasses in 5th edition.
Yeah, and there's the Battle Master still has the stances in 5th edition.
You know, I will say though, one thing I do miss.
Yep.
I wish the Warlord was still a thing. I like the idea of moving pieces on the board. I think that's a
I agree.
cool aspect. I
really like the Warlord. There's a couple. The Warden I also think is a really cool class, and that was the primordial defender. Was the Warden? The Warden was it was like, whereas the Barbarian would rage and become like this unstoppable force of destruction, the Warden had their state change where they became an immovable object.
I think they became literally like a rock. Sometimes
one of the builds was literally you turn into a living statue while you're doing their rage equivalent. It was pretty I think it was.
And to be fair, 4th edition, the 4 classes had a lot of ways to play those 4 classes.
Oh yeah,
a lot of ways. You could play a striker, vampire. Yeah, they're strikers.
So an interesting thing about the thing with the 4 roles, they called them roles, and those were essentially the 4 classes that were then rescanned over and over again. The thing about the 4 roles is this is the first time that the publisher acknowledges the roles in the world that have become standard to gamers, especially after the advent of video games.
Tank, DPS,
healer,
yep.
Crowd control, essentially. As the 4 roles they chose. This was the first time that the publishing house acknowledged them, and I think that they laid into it too hard, to put it blunt. But
that's what I was about to say. That's my big issue with it. It's like you pull the curtain back on that, and it kind of takes a lot of the fun out of it, because then there becomes a layer of expectation. Like, no, you're the healer. Your job is to be the healer. What if I don't want to be the healer this session?
I'll also talk to you about briefly, I'll talk about the way they had 4th edition had some of the coolest titles for classes.
Oh yeah.
Titles for skills, but they kind of announced to kind of not great stuff. For example, here's vampire, because I know you like vampires, Jeff, because you like Ravenloft. So vampiric reflexes. You can summon. You are a creature of the night, and you can move through shadows, allowing you to be defensive. +2 to AC.
Yeah, they went ham with the descriptions. There was one, I think it was a ranger power. It might have been called like Twin Fangs or something, where it's like you draw your swords into a cut, imitating the fangs of a wolf, closing together. Two weapon damage to one target.
They had to go ham on the descriptions because they nerfed all the other role playing aspects, man.
So
Child of the night. You have dark vision and you can you resist necrotic damage.
So what number resistance was it though, Mike?
5. You could resist 5 necrotic, but you also got vulnerable to radiant damage.
Yeah. Probably vulnerable 5, right?
Vulnerable 5, yeah.
Yep.
And then like you had like a bunch of really cool sounding powers, and you read them, and you're just like, oh, that sounds really cool. Wow.
The exact same thing that Steve across the table can do as a cleric.
Well, not even what Steve across the table can do. It's like, oh wow, that sounds really cool. Like there was a power that the assassin had to like summon his shadow from his body, and was like, oh cool, can I like do stuff? It's like, no, it can make an attack. Can I do other stuff with it? No, it can make an attack. That is all it can do.
It deals 1d6 damage. That's it.
It probably was a weapon damage because, like, on powers that used your weapons, instead of giving a die number, it would say like 2W, and that meant 2 weapon die.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
But and I think Alex, now we're running out of time, but I want you in the next 2 minutes you're gonna have 2 minutes of a platform here. Sell us on 4th edition. Tell us why it's not that bad with everything we just learned.
So Dr. JR, I'm sorry, doctor.
He's not a doctor.
So Dr. JR, this entire time has been going on about, and I mentioned before that it's a commonly cited thing, about taking away the roleplay powers. Those didn't really exist in 2nd edition or 1st edition either, as you talked about in previous episodes. Having a DM who came up in all the way back to 1st edition AD&D, he really put the idea that roleplay should be between the players and taking on the roles, improvising, acting. So that stuff I don't think matters a ton for the actual mechanical system. The mechanical system in there is for doing the things that you can't replicate at your table with your friends. And for that, 4th edition is really great. It also, the online character creator, which was the only thing we ended up getting about from the D&D Insider or whatever
it was really good. I'll be
honest. It was amazing. Really good. 10 minutes you could build any class. 20 minutes you could build any class to 40. Any character, and it automatically updated every time they published a new book, and with any errata they put out online. So if they released, like now they have the Unearthed Arcana, but they had like a newsletter where they'd release erratas. So you could literally pay your $5 a month and just create characters with all of the content. You didn't have to own all of the books unless you needed the guide of how to play, or you wanted the setting, monster stuff. The game made with a smaller party, because the number bloat was real. It really was. With a small party and a good DM, it made a phenomenal combat system that really, and there were so many flavor options. I could play that lightning sorcerer that I wanted to when I was 7. I could play the barbarian who's more of the stoic guardian of nature instead of the rampaging Mr. Hyde monster. There was so much cool, and it was well balanced, and everything was skinned in an interesting way. There was really fun flavor to everything, and especially I still think that if they had released 4th edition as like a separate module, like if they had released a proper AD&D and released like a core 4th edition as the like intro to D&D or the D&D basic, I think it could have been really successful, because I think it's a great way to explain combat mechanics to people. Because even if the numbers were really bloated and astronomical, the thing that they really that they did well was that it was straightforward with the numbers in terms of it's plus or it's minus. There's not this go up a die, refer to table 6, this kind of power gives you an increase to your die or makes you roll twice and you take the lower. No, it's just plus and minus. And I think that it's a really great tool to introduce people because the numbers make sense to somebody who's never sat down with a pen and paper role-playing game before.
And so, all in all, great combat simulator.
Yeah.
Good for someone who knows video games, who wants to just take a dive in, and with a good DM, you can make the game yours.
Awesome. Like, genuinely awesome. Because I had a phenomenal time with Dan in his store running us through the Forgotten Realms.
Well, I think that's why we play D&D at the end of the
Exactly.
day. Is a great story. I don't know if Jeff is sold. You sold, JR?
No, I'm sorry. As much heart as Alex has put into it, and I love you, brother, that you did a great job of selling it. It's just the nerfing of the role-playing aspects of the game will never ever sit right with me. And I heard the whole like, oh, but there's such great flavor. Yes, there's such great flavor in the text boxes on the book or in the books, but it
And
just
pretty
doesn't.
art. Very pretty art.
The art's phenomenal. I met one of the artists who worked on I think he did a couple of the metallic dragons, and they look amazing. And he's like, he talked about how amazingly easy it was to work with WotC on that, because they're just like, yeah, we need a steel dragon, and he just submitted them one of his like dragon designs that he recolored, and they're like, this is perfect.
Cool.
So yeah, finish your thought, man.
So
I was just saying, like, all in all, the role playing aspects they feel nerfed, and as many comments as you had as to the flavor and the art and everything, it just doesn't feel like it actually translates into actual play. But that also depends on your group and your GM. So
yeah,
you know, I'm willing to lean into that.
We might get a message from the 3 people who love 4th edition, Jeff.
I'm pretty
rest
sure
of the
there's
people that
6
played
of
with
us.
Alex?
I'm pretty sure there's 6 of us.
Oh yeah, it's Alex's party.
To be fair, at one point our party was 16 people.
Oh, that hurts.
It was a public game at a local game store.
Not
And the only game store in town. Yeah. Oh yeah. Literally, we'd spend a month in a single encounter at times.
Ugh.
Okay, wait, whoa. A month in a single encounter, buddy.
But this is also because the DM at the time loved his battles of Helm's Deep.
Ugh.
So real
I'm glad
quick,
you had fun.
a real
Last
quick,
point, because we gotta sign off.
Literally a last thing here. Because 4th edition doesn't give you the role play skills, in order to run a good game, it encourages role play instead of role play.
That was a good final tagline. So, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the show, my name is Michael OJ.
I'm Dr. J.R. Whitcomb.
Special guest Alex Silverman. Thank you so much, Mike and Dr. JR, for having me.
Yeah, always a pleasure. But as always, if you didn't like us, this has been a totally different podcast. All right. Good night, folks. Good night, Alex. Later, Mike. I'll talk to you all later.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.